I don't remember my mother's face. She died when I was 2, leaving just scattered photographs and Dad's stories to piece together who she was. My name is Kimberly, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the truth is the only weapon you need against lies. Growing up in a politician's house meant getting used to empty spaces. Our mansion had 6 bedrooms, but most days it felt like I rattled around in there alone, like a marble in an empty box. Dad threw himself into his work after Mom died. For 2 years straight, he was just gone. Not physically, he still lived with us, but emotionally, he might as well have been on another planet. "Your father's giving a speech tonight," Kimberly, my nanny, Sarah, would say, turning on the TV. "See? There he is." I'd press my little hands against the screen, trying to touch his face. That's how I usually saw him back then, through a glass barrier, talking to crowds of strangers instead of me. Thank God for Grandma Rose. She'd come over almost every day, bringing her famous chocolate chip cookies and stories about Dad when he was my age. I was 6 when everything changed. Dad came home one evening, looking more alive than I'd seen him in years. "Kimberly, honey, I want you to meet someone special," he said. That's how Patricia entered our lives. My new stepmother was tall, perfectly put together, with this practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. I remember standing there in my Pokemon pajamas, looking up at her, and feeling something off. The first few months weren't too bad. Patricia mostly ignored me, which was fine by me. I had my own wing of the house anyway, my bedroom, bathroom, and a little study area where I did my homework. Sarah stayed on as my nanny, and between her and Grandma Rose, I barely had to interact with Patricia at all. But I started noticing things. Like how Patricia's smile would drop the second Dad left the room. Or how she'd accidentally schedule her fancy lunch parties during my piano recitals, so Dad had to choose between them. He always chose her events, couldn't disappoint the wife of a rising political star, after all. "Don't take it personally, sweetie," Grandma Rose would tell me. "Your father's just busy. The campaign trail is demanding." I tried not to. Really, I did. But it's hard not to take it personally when you're watching your father's career updates on YouTube instead of having dinner with him. When your stepmother's shopping sprees get more attention than your straight A's. High school changed everything. Dad started talking about my future more, probably because his advisors told him education was a hot topic for voters. Whatever the reason, I wasn't complaining. For the first time in years, he seemed actually interested in my life. "Yale, Harvard, Stanford, take your pick, Kimmy," he said one evening, surprising me by actually being home for dinner. "With your grades, you could get into any of them. I'll cover everything, tuition, housing, whatever you need." I nearly choked on my pasta. Patricia's fork clattered against her plate. Then came my 16th birthday. I walked outside that morning to find a brand new Mercedes in the driveway, complete with a massive red bow. Dad was standing there, grinning like a kid himself. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." He dangled the keys in front of me. "Think you can handle it?" I screamed and hugged him so hard I probably wrinkled his $1,000 suit. For a moment, I felt like I had my old dad back, the one from before Mom died, before politics ate his life. Patricia's voice cut through my joy like ice. "A Mercedes? Really, Richard? For a 16-year-old? I could practically feel her glaring at my back as Dad showed me the car's features. Later that night, I heard them arguing in their bedroom. "You're turning her into exactly what the opposition accuses us of representing, privileged, entitled rich kids." Patricia's voice carried through the walls. "What's next? A private jet for graduation? She's my daughter, Patricia. I've missed too many birthdays already. And how will it look when she wraps that car around a tree? Or when her spoiled little friends get her into drugs? Have you thought about your campaign?" After that, Patricia made it her mission to save me from myself, as she put it. Every time Dad mentioned college plans, she'd bring up some article about trust fund kids going wild at university. When I needed money for school supplies, she'd question every penny. "Kimberly, dear," she'd say in that sugary voice she used when her country club friends were over, "do tell everyone about that C you got in chemistry. Such a shame, especially with all the resources your father provides." Meanwhile, her own credit card bills were astronomical. "I'm so lonely when Richard's away," she'd pout to Dad. "Shopping is my only comfort. Another $5,000 handbag. Another spa weekend. Another renovation project." I tried staying out of it. Really, I did. But Patricia wouldn't let me. "Your father works so hard," she'd say loudly when her friends visited, "and some people just take without any gratitude." She'd look right at me while saying it. One day, I finally snapped. It was during one of her lunch parties. She'd been making little digs at me all afternoon, and I just couldn't take it anymore. "At least I'm not the one bleeding him dry with shopping sprees," I shot back. The room went silent. Patricia's face turned red. That evening, Dad called me into his study. "Patricia tells me you embarrassed her in front of her friends today. Kimberly, you need to try harder. She's doing her best to be a mother to you." I wanted to scream. Instead, I just nodded and went to my room. After that, I became a ghost in my own house. I took my meals in my room, timing my kitchen raids for when Patricia was out. I studied harder than ever, determined to get into a college far away from her. The only time I had to see her was when Dad was home, and then I'd play my part in our little family theater production. Winter break couldn't come fast enough that year. My friends had planned a snowboarding trip to Mountain Ridge Resort, and surprisingly, Patricia agreed when I asked permission. Dad was away on some campaign tour, as usual. "Here's money for the trip," Patricia said, holding out several $100 bills. Her lips were pressed into a thin line. "But remember, Kimberly, no showing off. We don't need stories about the politician's spoiled daughter making a scene at a ski resort." The morning we left, the sky was perfect, crystal clear blue, with fresh powder on the slopes. I'd been snowboarding at Mountain Ridge since I was 13, and the familiar rush of excitement filled me as we pulled into the parking lot. The first few runs were perfect. The wind in my face, the spray of snow, the absolute freedom, this was my happy place. No Patricia, no political drama, just me and the mountain. Then it happened. I still replay that moment in my head sometimes. I was on my favorite trail, coming down at a good clip. I'd done this run dozens of times before. But somehow, maybe I caught an edge, maybe I was going too fast, everything went wrong in an instant. The world spun. Sky, snow, sky, snow. I felt myself rolling, tumbling, my body hitting the slope again and again. There was pain, sharp and overwhelming, and then everything went quiet except for the sound of my own breathing and people shouting in the distance. "Don't move." Someone was kneeling beside me. "The ski patrol is coming." The pain in my legs was excruciating. Through the haze, I heard words like multiple fractures and emergency transport. In the ambulance, once they'd given me something for the pain, I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. Dad would know what to do. Dad would help. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. With growing desperation, I called Patricia. "What?" her sharp voice answered. "Patricia, there's been an accident." "I'm in an ambulance." "Of course there has." Her voice turned venomous. "You worthless little drunk. I knew you'd pull something like this. Stealing money wasn't enough, now you have to embarrass your father with a drunken accident?" "What? I wasn't drinking. I just fell." "Save your lies for someone else, you little thief. Don't bother calling again." The line went dead. I stared at my phone in shock, tears streaming down my face. Thief? Drunk? What was she talking about? "Miss, we're almost at the hospital," the paramedic said gently. "Is there someone else we can call for you?" I nodded numbly, giving them Grandma Rose's number. My legs throbbed with every bump in the road, but somehow the pain in my chest hurt worse. Hours passed in a blur of x-rays, doctors, and morphine. I kept checking my phone, waiting for Dad to call back. He had to have gotten my messages by now. He had to know I was hurt. But no call came. The nurses were kind, bringing me extra blankets and Jell-O cups. But as night fell and I lay there alone in the sterile hospital room, listening to the beeping of machines, I felt more abandoned than I ever had in my life. I woke up to sunshine streaming through the hospital window and the familiar scent of Grandma Rose's perfume. For a moment, just a moment, everything felt okay. Then I saw her face. Grandma Rose looked older than I'd ever seen her, her usual warm smile replaced by something pained and worried. She was wringing her hands, something she only did when things were really bad. "Grandma, what's wrong? Is Dad coming?" She sat down heavily in the chair beside my bed. "Oh, Kimberly, your father called me last night. He's very angry, sweetheart. He says you put his whole campaign at risk." "What? How?" "He says," she paused, looking like each word hurt her. "He says you stole money from the house. That you were drinking with your friends on the mountain, got into some kind of fight, and then fell while intoxicated." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "That's not true. None of that is true. I was just snowboarding, you know I've done it 100 times before." "I know, honey, I know," she reached for my hand. "But your father, he wants you to come stay with me after you're released. He says he's too disappointed to see you right now." The room started spinning. This couldn't be happening. My own father thought I was a drunk thief? He wouldn't even come see me in the hospital? "But Grandma, you know me. You know I wouldn't." "Of course I know, sweetheart." She squeezed my hand. "We'll figure this out. We always do." I spent the next few hours trying to process everything. My legs ached, but the pain in my heart was worse. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dad's face from my 16th birthday, proud and smiling. How had everything gone so wrong? Then the door opened, and Patricia walked in. A nurse was checking my drip, and Patricia put on quite a show. "Oh, you poor dear," she cooed, patting my hand. "This must be so difficult for you." The nurse smiled approvingly at my stepmother's apparent concern. "She's lucky to have such a caring family," she said, making some notes on my chart. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell the nurse that this woman was the reason my own father wouldn't come see me. But I just lay there, watching Patricia play her part. As soon as the nurse's footsteps faded down the hall, something in my gut told me to reach for my phone. I'd learned long ago to trust those instincts when it came to Patricia. Quietly, I started the voice recorder. Just in time. Patricia's face transformed into something ugly and triumphant. She perched on the edge of my bed, enjoying my discomfort as I tried to shift away. "Oh, Kimberly," she practically purred. "You have no idea how long I've waited for this moment." "What are you talking about?" She laughed, not her usual polite titter, but a harsh, cruel sound. "You really are slow, aren't you? Let me spell it out for you. Daddy dearest thinks his precious little girl is a drunk and a thief." My throat went dry. You told him that?" "Of course I did. And the best part?" She leaned in closer, her expensive perfume making me nauseous. "He believed every word. That you stole thousands from his safe, money that's actually sitting quite nicely in my private account, by the way. That you were drinking and fighting on that mountain before your little accident. He'll never believe." "He already has." She was practically gloating now. "Your father won't be paying for any fancy colleges now. No more trust fund, no more inheritance. I've made sure of that. Soon, I'll be his sole heir, exactly as it should be." I felt the walls closing in. Why are you doing this?" "Because you're in my way. Always have been." His precious little reminder of his first wife. She stood up, smoothing her designer skirt. "But now you're just the family disappointment. The drunk, crippled daughter he'd rather forget." Tears were streaming down my face now. I'll get better, the doctors said. Please, she waved her hand dismissively. You'll be lucky if you ever walk normally again. Not that it matters, you won't need that fancy car of yours anymore. I'll be taking that off your hands. After all, what use does a disabled person have for a Mercedes? She walked to the door, then turned back with a smile that chilled me to my bones. Face it, Kimberly. You're all alone now. No money, no father, no future. Just you and your dear old grandmother, struggling to get by. Exactly where you belong. The door clicked shut behind her, and I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone and stopped the recording. I played back the recording, her venomous words, now preserved forever in digital form. My fingers hovered over the phone screen as I contemplated what to do with this evidence. After I was discharged from the hospital, I did not return to my parents' place. Grandma Rose's house wasn't huge like my father's mansion, but it had something our old house never had: warmth. Real warmth, the kind that comes from love, not central heating. Recovery was hell. Physical therapy 3 times a week, endless exercises, learning to walk again step by excruciating step. Grandma Rose was there through all of it, holding my hand when the pain got too bad, celebrating every tiny victory. Between therapy sessions, I threw myself into my studies. My laptop became my classroom, video lectures, online assignments, virtual study groups. Some days I could barely get out of bed, but I still logged on, determined not to let Patricia's predictions about my future come true. Then came graduation time. I'd managed to keep my grades up despite everything, and the acceptance letters started arriving. Yale, Columbia, Berkeley. Each one a dream school, each one completely out of reach. With shaking hands, I dialed Dad's number. It had been a year since the accident, since he'd abandoned me. Maybe now. Dad? My voice sounded small, even to myself. Kimberly, cold, formal, a politician's voice. I told you not to call. Please, just listen. I got into Yale. I'm not paying for college for a thief and a drunk. Don't call this number again. Click. I sat there, phone in hand, the recording from the hospital burning a hole in my pocket. I could have played it for him. Could have exposed Patricia's lies right then and there. But something stopped me. Pride, maybe. Or maybe it was the realization that a father who could believe those lies so easily, who could abandon his injured daughter without even hearing her side, maybe he didn't deserve the truth. I'll find another way, I told Grandma that night. And I did. I got a job as a barista, then picked up evening shifts at a bookstore. I learned to tune out the news when Dad's face appeared on TV, campaigning for his next big position. I stopped flinching when customers mentioned his name, stopped caring when they talked about what a family man he was. 3 years passed like that. Wake up, go to work, study in between shifts, save every penny. Grandma Rose helped as much as she could, even trying to sell her antique jewelry at one point. I wouldn't let her. You should be proud of yourself, she told me one evening as I counted my savings. I was about halfway to my goal. I realized. And I was. The girl who'd lived in that mansion, who'd driven that Mercedes, who'd waited desperately for her father's attention, she was gone. In her place was someone stronger. Someone who didn't need his approval or his money. I was wiping down tables at the coffee shop when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Usually, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Hello? Kimberly, darling, that honey-sweet voice. Patricia. My hand tightened around the phone. What do you want? Now, is that any way to talk to your loving stepmother? She laughed that fake laugh I remembered so well. Especially when I'm calling with such an opportunity for you. I sat down, my legs suddenly weak. I'm not interested in anything you have to offer. Oh, but you will be. Your father's campaign is ramping up again. His image team has this brilliant idea, focusing on family values. They want to do a series of interviews with you. I almost laughed. You can't be serious. Very serious. You'll talk about what a wonderful father Richard is, how supportive he's been. How close we all are as a family. The loving daughter, reunited with her devoted father and stepmother. The public will eat it up. The sheer audacity of it struck me speechless for a moment. 3 years of silence, of struggling, of rebuilding my life from scratch, and now they wanted me to play happy families? You're insane, I finally managed. Why would I ever help you? Her voice turned sharp. Because if you don't, you can forget about any inheritance. And don't forget, your father can still press charges for that money you stole. I never stole anything. You took that money. Your word against mine, dear. Who do you think people will believe? The respected politician's wife or the troubled, alcoholic daughter? Something snapped inside me. All these years of swallowing her lies, of taking the high road, for what? Go to hell, Patricia. I hung up. My hands were shaking as I sat at my tiny desk in Grandma's house. My laptop hummed to life. The audio files were right where I'd kept them all this time, Patricia's hospital room confession, and now this latest call too. 3 years ago, I'd chosen silence. Chose to walk away and rebuild on my own terms. But enough was enough. I opened my social media accounts. Started typing. For 3 years, I've stayed quiet about what really happened. I attached the audio files. Added screenshots of Patricia's threatening messages. Everything. My finger hovered over the post button. This would change everything, not just for Patricia and Dad, but for me too. No going back after this. I pressed post. I had no idea what I'd started. Within hours, my post went viral. By morning, it was everywhere, news sites, political blogs, social media. My phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from reporters and TV producers. We'd love to have you tell your story on our morning show, they'd say. Or, this could really damage your father's campaign. Care to comment? I turned them all down. This wasn't about revenge anymore. Watching his polling numbers plummet didn't bring me the satisfaction I'd expected. If anything, it made me feel hollow. Then, exactly 1 week after the post, my phone rang. Dad's number. Can we meet? He asked. His voice sounded different, tired, human. Please? We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop, not the one where I worked, but a quiet place across town. When I walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the polished politician in his perfect suit. Instead, I saw a man who looked like he hadn't slept in days, his tie loose, his shoulders slumped. Kimberly, he said, standing up. I don't even know where to start. The beginning might be good, I said, sitting down. He took a deep breath. I heard the recordings. All of them. I'd been listening to them over and over, trying to understand how I could have been so blind. His voice cracked. I failed you. Not just after the accident, but for years before that. I was so focused on my career, on building this perfect political image, that I forgot what really mattered. Tears were streaming down his face now. I'd never seen my father cry before. Patricia confessed everything, he continued. The stolen money, the lies about you drinking, how she manipulated the whole situation after your accident. She admitted she'd been trying to drive us apart for years. He reached across the table, taking my hands in his. Can you ever forgive me? I started crying too. I missed you, Dad, so much. We stood up and hugged, right there in the middle of the coffee shop. 3 years of pain and separation dissolved in that embrace. I've filed for divorce, he told me later. The lawyers are handling it. And I want to pay for your college, any school you want. It's the least I can do. Yale's still my dream school, I admitted. Then Yale it is. That evening, I made another post. This time, I told the whole story, not just Patricia's manipulation, but also how my father had owned his mistakes and chosen to make things right. To my surprise, people loved it. The story of a politician choosing his daughter over his image, admitting his failures, and working to make amends resonated with voters in a way no carefully crafted campaign message ever could. 2 months later, I moved into my dorm at Yale. Dad helped me carry my boxes up, just like any other father would. Grandma Rose cried happy tears as she made my bed with fresh sheets. Patricia? Last I heard, she was living off her divorce settlement somewhere in Florida. Sometimes I think about sending her a thank you note. After all, her final power play was what ultimately brought my father and me back together. But mostly, I think about how healing isn't always quiet or private. Sometimes it takes a public explosion to clear the way for something better to grow. Sometimes you have to break everything down to build it back up right. As for me, I'm majoring in political science. Ironic, I know. But I figure someone needs to show the world that politics and truth aren't always enemies. And Dad? He won his next election. Turns out, people prefer real humanity over perfect facades anyway. They say the truth will set you free. What they don't tell you is that sometimes, the truth does more than that. Sometimes, it brings you home.